Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution.
The revolution
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, John Corcoran.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I'm the host of the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where I feel so privileged. I get to talk to smart CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs of all kinds of companies like YPO, EO, Activation Blizzard, LendingTree, OpenTable, Axe Software, and many more. I'm also the co-founder of Rise 25, where we help connect B2B business owners to their ideal prospects. And I'm really excited today because I get to interview someone who I've been following for a long time, known for a long time, but I've never actually interviewed him for a podcast. Amazingly, I always felt like at some point I get around to it. You know, nothing like a global pandemic to make an excuse to interview someone. But Chris Brogan is the president of Chris Brogan Media. He offers business storytelling and marketing advisory help for mid to larger size companies. But that only describes a small part of all the things that he does. He's a sought after keynote speaker, New York Times bestselling author of 9 books and counting. One of my favorites, by the way, was The Impact Equation, which I remember reading 7 or 8 years ago. This was not long after I'd become an entrepreneur. And it was one of the few books, literally one of the few books I can remember in my lifetime. I couldn't read it on a couch because I was writing so many notes. I had to read it sitting at my dining room table. So I read almost the entire thing sitting at my dining room table with a notepad next to me because I was taking so many notes. It was that good. I would highly recommend it to everyone. Chris has spoken or consulted with some of the biggest brands you may know, Disney, Coke, Google, you name it. He's also appeared on the Dr. Phil show, interviewed Richard Branson, all kinds of amazing luminaries turned to Chris for advice. And he was even interviewed by Tony Robbins on his Internet Money Mastery series. We're going to get to him in a second, but first, before we do, this episode is brought to you by Rise 25 Media. Rise 25 helps B2B businesses to get clients, referrals, strategic partnerships with done-for-you podcasts and content marketing. If you're listening to this and you're thinking, you know what, I like podcasts. Should I do a podcast? Well, I've been saying yes for 10 years. We really specialize in helping B2B businesses with a high client lifetime value. But even if that doesn't describe you, I tell everyone, you know, you'd love doing it. So think about it. If you want to learn more, you can go to our website, Rise 25 Media, or email support@rise25media.com. All right, Chris, so super excited to talk to you. We even did a webinar a number of years ago, but never actually sat down and interviewed you, which I'm excited about. But let's talk first about the topic of podcasting, because you were an early adopter of podcasting, or even earlier adopter of blogging back in, I think, 98. But podcasting, you started around 2005.
Right.
And what was the landscape like back then? And what brought you into it in the first place? Because you come in and out of podcasting over the years. So I want to touch on that as well.
So I was the year after the bleeding edge. So the very bleeding edge was pretty much 2004. That's when people were like, you know, calling each other on the phone because they would have formatting issues and all that kind of a stuff.
Yeah.
Come 2005, it felt like you could almost teach someone how to get a podcast onto a device. Now, 2 things were not true back then. 2005 is right before smartphone ubiquity. Like iPhone wasn't out yet.
Right.
This was before ubiquitous broadband. So it was at a time when you could say something as simple as, "Oh, you have broadband," and that would mean something in and of itself. Like there were no categories of it. It was just broadband or no. And obviously those things are different now. The other thing that was true of back then was that the people who produced shows, there just weren't any of these kind of done for you kind of shops, right? You know, you had to do the work. And so I liked that because I'm a bit of a nerd. So I liked the idea that I could make my audio, trim the audio, take out as many ums as I could.
You like tinkering with things.
Pocket it up into nice little bits. Take out, you know, one thing I learned as an interviewer, and you probably, when you listen back on yourself, if, you know, you're good right now, I mean, you're being quiet. As a host, when I'm interviewing people, I'll preamble so much. And I just had like the simplest question. And I just want to delete 4 minutes of me and just ask the 1 sentence question and have the person, the guest that everyone came to, get there. So what I liked in the old days was that. Now, I've always had a show since podcasting started, but I just sort of like let them drop whenever I want, and I'm never fussy about it. And there's all these shows that are like so excited about their 4,000th episode, but I'm just so like, the first show was called Fat Guy Gets Fit. I figured if I just never lost all the weight, I could just have the show in perpetuity. I launched a little network of shows back when that was a stupid idea. Listen how bad this is. I said to
You did events around it too, conferences as well.
Oh yeah, we launched the event Pod Camp in 2006, where Christopher Penn and I decided that we'd have an unconference style event, and that was super successful. I mean, that went everywhere, but it's a not-for-profit type event, so it was successful insofar as we get thousands and thousands of attendees all over the world. But my own shows, I mean, I started a little podcasting network where I convinced a whole bunch of people who had never done podcasting before to go out and buy things like iRivers and, those pens that you could record into and all that back when there just weren't the devices. Now everyone's phone has a full podcasting setup on it. Everyone's laptop has everything in it. It's just all there ready for you. And so,
and back then you had to explain to people what a podcast was. They didn't know what a podcast was. So, asking someone to do an interview for a what? I don't understand.
Well, we would lie. We were just like, you want to do our internet radio show? Yeah, sure.
That's
Could
good.
not say podcast. They were like, what? And then for a minute, Apple tried to sue everyone who called it a podcast. It was very brief. They changed their mind. They said, never mind. We get it. It's a word. But because they had iPods and we were sort of stealing podcast.
Right.
Because, it was a cast that went to people's iPod back when that was cool. Now, if your kid shows up with an iPod to the playground, they're going to get beat up.
Right. Yeah. No, but it's so much easier now to get a podcast. I mean, you just go straight to your phone. You don't know downloading. Back then it was like you had to download this file to your computer and then transfer it over, find the cord, transfer it over to the iPod. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. Half the time it doesn't play, Yeah. So what did you learn in those early days? Like, in terms of, how did it help your business?
What I felt was and believed so much sooner than it was actually vaguely true. It's only now pretty much vaguely true. What I believed was this is a great delivery tool for information that will hit a very specific audience. So I thought B2B people would love this thing. I thought, any kind of a niche experience where, you really only have to get a few hundred people to hear something or a few thousand people to hear something. I thought this is the best delivery system in the world. What do we have? We have people commuting everywhere. We have people walking their animal. We have people pushing their kid around in a stroller or, crouched in front of the TV while Barney drones on. And all you have to do is stick one little earbud in one ear, and then you've got them. Yeah. And there's so many spots where non-reading consumption of content makes a lot more sense. And so I thought that if I could take everyone's jog every day, if I could take everyone's commute time. I was a guy who was commuting. I worked in Massachusetts at the time I started podcasting. My commute was almost an hour each way. Near the end, it got to almost 2 hours each way. I was going all the way to the southern part of the state from the very northern part of the state. And you have to kind of like drive through Boston traffic to get there, which is never good. And so I had almost 4 hours a day in my car. And so, boy, was I the guy. And I think that's still true. I mean, we're in the land of quarantine when you and I are recording this. So however evergreen this will be, right now, some of the numbers on podcasting have gone down briefly, but that won't be forever. When everybody's kind of back to as usual in some form or fashion, this is still one of the best transmission mediums in the world for getting information into somebody's ear while they're doing other stuff.
Now you bounce around as we said. You've started different shows. Now you're doing a video show. I think that's so admirable because so many people are afraid to start something. They're afraid if no one's going to be listening, and you're doing it publicly. You'll try a new social channel, try it out for a little bit, even if there's no one there, and connect with whoever is there and build a relationship just to test it out. So talk a little bit about that and why now you're doing a video show, why you pivoted away from podcasting for now, and you're doing it as a video show on YouTube.
It's interesting because the barrier to entry for audio podcasting is the lowest it's ever been. So the hard work of doing a podcast is really just me recording with somebody, because I like to do interview shows. So me recording with somebody, me sitting and doing a little bit of editing, just pull out a few ums and put it up. That's it. Slap a little audio at the beginning, slap a little audio at the end. I've done my job. I'm done. That's pretty easy. It's even easier pushing record on the video, doing our thing, and then pushing stop on the video, and then dragging the file onto YouTube and calling it a day. So I am using Facebook Live as my recording platform for no reason other than it's just easy and everybody vaguely has a Facebook account. I record it using a platform called StreamYard that my friend Kerry Gorgone showed me. There's
Great
another
one.
one.
StreamYard's so great.
So
Yeah.
StreamYard everybody was using something. And then it felt like everyone had StreamYard once they saw, oh my gosh, how can I make it look like a show? I'll use this thing. You can, once you pay for StreamYard, you have the ability to download the video file, just download the audio file. So you can make a podcast that way too if you really want to do the editing. So the video show is that, and one of the things that and my show keeps evolving. So I'm on the 4th iteration of the show, where in which now I've gone from just having a guest and kind of a very solid, like me and the guest, this is the show, to I will have sort of a shot clock like in television, meaning I'll do a segment, there'll be another segment, I'll bring in a guest, I'll let go of the guest, I'll do another thing, and then I'll have a feature guest, and then I'll do another thing, and then we're out, so like a show. And the only reason for that is attention, right? We need to keep people's attention. So if someone is 8 minutes into the guest and they're like, they're not sticking around. And so I can't control always if my guest is the best in the world or not, but I can say that if you stick around, you're going to get some other version of the show as you keep waiting, and you might like another segment even though you didn't like that guest.
So it's a little more work on your end, but you find it's more worth it because of people's attention spans these days.
I think it'll be. I'm a few days before executing it full on. I'm practicing little bits of it, and then hopefully the orchestra comes together. And because I record this live, every mistake I make is right in front of everybody. So when I push my little video intro, if it doesn't go in front of everybody who's sitting there live looking at me funny. Usually I'll send my guest.
Talk about that, because they had many clients who struggle with that piece. They say like, no, in my industry, it has to be perfect, or it's going to damage my credibility if things aren't perfect. And there's a lot of fear over any kind of failure and how that'll expose them. And you've worked with some amazing luminary, Fortune 500 companies, from Disney, you name it, all kinds of different companies. And, Coke, Google, GM, Microsoft. Do you worry about that? Do you worry about, fiddling around with Facebook Live and that the video that's going to somehow damage your credibility?
Now, it depends on who in some ways. So if I were doing a project for Disney, it would have to be Disney good. The project I did for Disney before, the couple projects I did, were some live events where I keynoted, and then I did a lot of kind of behind the scenes of sort of helping them take the community who came to these events and do something interesting with them. Now, I could put my show out to that community and I'd feel great. There's no way that mouse logo would go on it because they would hate to be associated with me in that way. But that's how it would work. But with lots of other companies who think what you said is true, it's almost never true. Like if someone's like, I'm Lockheed Martin and I make jet engines and jets and things like that, I can't have someone thinking I don't know how to make a video show. It's not true. It's not true, because humans consume this. And humans are imperfect. And humans, what they want least is to feel like they can't reach or attain that spot. So the sort of secret goal of being Chris Brogan for all these years is I mess up every day. And so every day someone sees it and goes, well, if he could do that, I'm probably better at it than him. And what's attractive? Thinking that you're better than someone else and that you can still learn from them on the way up. Do you know what I mean? I don't make it, if you're working on your fitness, you don't go and look at a Mr. Olympia and try to decide how you're going to look like that. You look at the really big fat dude who lost 50 pounds, and then you see what they did, and then you figure out how to get to the next level, right? So I try to make that explicit in everything I create. I have a little video intro for my video show. It by choice, it doesn't actually fit the screen. So you kind of see me in the background waiting for it to play. And it's on purpose because I think it's funny. But I also think it's befitting of the fact that it just doesn't have to be perfect. It has to make you feel like you're part of something. And people who have been at a show as an attendee more than twice know and think it's hilarious the same way.
That's so cool. Talk a little bit about, you mentioned kind of as an aside, you said, I do an interview show. And, for me, that's a given. Why would you not do an interview show? Because if not, you're missing out on the amazing opportunities to build relationships, connect, have a conversation with someone like yourself that, you admire their work, don't talk to all that frequently, to have the opportunity to talk to them. You've connected with some amazing luminaries, Paul Coelho. I don't know, how do you say his name? Paul
Paulo
Coelho?
Coelho.
Coelho. I read his books. I don't even know how to pronounce his name.
Right.
Harvey McKay, Stephen Pressfield, been interviewed by Tony Robbins. Talk a little bit tell me some stories about some of those experiences. And have there ever been times when you've just been kind of pinching yourself, like how I've been able to talk to these luminaries whose work I admire?
Every time. So if I could get as name droppy as humanly possible,
I'd love it.
I'll tell you a story. So this one day a phone call comes in, and it's one of my editors at Success Magazine back when I was writing for them. And they said, we've got to ask you some questions about the Kardashians. And I said, I don't know the first thing about the Kardashians. So I hand the phone to my now ex, Jack, and I say, hey, Kardashian something, something. And they talk for like 40 minutes. I get my phone back 40 minutes later, almost out of battery. They hang up, they call me back and go, can you rewrite the cover story about the Kardashians? And I'm about to say no. And then they throw out how much they're going to pay me because it's a rush job. And we'll owe you something. So I say, I know what I want already. I want to interview Richard Branson. There's no way he's ever going to say yes to me. So can Success and I interview Richard Branson? Yeah. They're like, done. So I write the Kardashian thing. It's great. Works out. It's fine. I don't need to know anything. I just asked Jack. Branson, I get to his people and I say, I want to interview him via Skype. It's his first Skype interview. I can't really use the video because he's a bit nervous throughout it. Billionaire, world famous.
Nervous about doing a Skype video interview?
He wasn't comfy. He didn't know who I was. And he didn't know, is he going to, he doesn't have hold of all the dimensions of this. Am I going to do something that makes him look bad? Anything like that. He just wasn't feeling comfy. And it showed in the video. So I opted not to ever use the video. But what a moment to interview my business legend, Richard Branson.
Yeah.
And I've had that experience a bunch of times, a bunch of Navy SEALs. What I found, and you may well know as well, the minute an author has a new book out, boy, are they susceptible to want to be on your stupid show, even if it doesn't have the numbers.
I've got a stack of them right here. Yeah, it's a great opportunity. Absolutely.
So, every now and again, I don't get someone. I really wanted Stanley McChrystal, and he was like, I'm just too busy for you, dude. And I was like, I get it. I don't know how I get the
Sometimes it's
like
timing too, right? That could be it too. Yeah.
And I name dropped every military person I'd ever done. I stacked the deck. He was a Navy guy. I listed all my Navy SEALs. He was still like, well, whatever. And, and it was fine. I didn't get him. But what I like about it and what I like about the process and what I like about interviews, I mean, there's lots of other reasons why you would do a show. So you could do an instructional show. You could do a very how-to based show. You could do kind of a thought leadership show, which I think is so hard to sustain pure solo all the time. But some people can. I mean,
I don't know how people do that. I don't know. I have no idea.
More oration than they have time left on the earth, right?
Yeah, no.
But I think that what I like about interviews, if people do the work to practice to be a better interviewer, which is one of the only religions I'm following right now, is I study every day to be a better interviewer. I feel that you can really make magical things happen if you can peel a few threads out and not just ask kind of core questions. And I think that I strive for that moment where someone says, no one has asked me that question, or, oh my gosh, I had never thought of it that way. That's the part I go back and, there's little clips that you stick on, places to promo the show. I have a little secret file of those that I have for how much I feel good that I asked a good question.
Yeah, that's a great one. Let's pivot now and talk a bit about StoryLeader. And so we're recording this in mid-July 2020, global pandemic's unfolding. You wrote a blog post in January of this year about your StoryLeader framework, which interestingly enough, you had been working on for a long time. You said you trademarked the idea many, many years ago. So, I'll let you describe what StoryLeader is or what the concept was for it. But I'm also interested to ask about, how leaders today are needing to tell their story in a different way and pivot and tell their story in a different way in light of what's been happening in the world.
So one slight correction, I only applied for the trademark this year, but I'd been working on concepts in the StoryLeader concept for years and years. So, and since January, of course, it changed a little bit. So in January, I started pushing out. I'm known mostly as kind of a marketing and sales kind of guy, slightly a technology kind of guy. And that's who you think of when you think of me. You think, oh, I should talk to that guy about marketing, maybe about tech. And that's the kind of crowd I get. But I wanted to turn myself towards leadership a little bit, because really whenever I had those marketing conversations, the C-suite came anyway. There was always a CEO, a COO, or somebody else in the room with the marketing person. And I had done some projects with both HR teams and also Alex Shootman, who's the CEO over at Workfront. He had me in to do a project where we really had to change company culture kind of quickly. He was given a bit of a mandate from the board saying, you really have to make a shift faster than not. And I know that's not really easy. What are you going to do? And for reasons I don't fully get, he called me. You know what I mean? Like, because there's nothing in my bona fides that say Brogan could do that. He just had a feeling. That's what makes him a great CEO, by the way. Only because it worked out, not anything to do with it.
Right.
Could have failed horribly, but he did it. And what we
and
did,
when he came to you for that, did you think, why are you coming to me for culture? That's not my thing. Or did you think, yeah, I can do this?
I'm an aspirant person about a lot of things. So I write very convincingly about a lot of things that I may or may not have the backing to do, but that I have the passion to take a swing at. Yeah. And he, through the writing, this is the real lesson, John, before I say what I did. The real lesson is I just kept putting out there my better ideas. And he went, wow, I like that idea. It's just a post. There's nothing there. It's nothing real. It's just words I put out. He said, I really like that. I want to explore that right there. There was no business plan. There was no business model. It was a blog post. Went rolling by. Could have been a podcast. So he says, I really want to do this culture thing. And I say, I think I can do it. That's in my head. So January, I start StoryLeader, and I'm like, I could do this for more companies. I can do culture shift stuff. I can do stuff where what I say in the premise of StoryLeader is that, stats and numbers only tell you so far. It's like carrying around your food on a pencil. You know what I mean? Like you can't drink soup with a pencil. And basically story leaders use stories to do the heavy lifting, meaning I could fill your head with numbers, but if I tell you a story that kind of encapsulates what I really need you to do, then you're really going to go with it.
Oh, it's all about that. I mean, so you think about all the big companies, they have a story behind them, or they use stories in order to drive and motivate. You look at like what Elon Musk is doing these days with SpaceX and with with Tesla. It's like it's a big story. It's a big vision, getting humans to Mars. It's a big story, and that's things that people rally around.
And those mission type stories. So I have 3 types of stories in StoryLeader. I have mission stories, belonging stories, growth stories. Mission stories are like, we're all going to Mars. That's the mission. Everybody who knows that we're part of this, you're coming to Mars. Even if you work at Tesla and you're making cool space cars, that's part of getting to Mars too. You just don't know it because it's day-to-day stuff. We need to make money to get to Mars, so let's sell cars. Belonging stories are, we're the type of people who. Why did they make the Boring Company? We're the type of people who thought, well, why can't we do that? Why can't we dig a hole in the ground, right? That's another Musk story. Why can't we make a hole that we can stick our Teslas in and have robots drive these cars so you don't scrape them on the sides of the hole? And we'll make another secret runway all the way underneath LA, right? And so that's a belonging story, because we're the type of people who, or we belong here. That's an internal and an external story. We're inclusive people is a belonging story. Black lives and all lives matter. All the lives matter, That's 2 stories, right? One's very cognizant of this time in our life. One maybe is tone deaf. So you go, oh, maybe I don't belong with these people. And the third, growth stories, they're split into 2. One half is pure motivational speaker stuff. It's Tony Robbins, growth, just general growth. I want to feel better. The other growth is correctional on whether or not you're doing this stuff that's going to get you to the mission. And so some growth stories are basically like, well, let me tell you why, even though we say we're the most family company in the world, you can't really take every day off to go back and hang out with your kids. If you miss 4 hours every single day, then every other person who has a family is in a little bit of a challenge because they have to pick up for you not being here. And so that's really hurting your work family. And we've really got to kind of think about how we're going to, prioritize this, right? It's a growth story. What is changing and has changed since this beautiful quarantine has rolled around, beautiful being a joke, the working from home setup of this, suddenly culture is not necessarily a given. It's not, it's not pies delivered on Friday. It is not water cooler chat. It's not the fact you can always go into any boss's office and ask a question, because everything is different. So how does culture survive this? How do you hire a new person when you have a team that's used to working together? What if your ritual for working together was, you'd all go out and just shoot hoops in the backyard at the office or something like that? What do you do now? Because you just hired your first person who's 8,200 miles away, or you just hired your person, you're in greater San Francisco area. That's already happened. The real estate market said, oh, no problem. And suddenly Utah is getting popular. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, great. But a San Francisco dead center of metro working human is very different than somebody who's out of Provo waiting for the slopes. Mm-hmm. And, my first experience like that ever was I went to, I'm a New Englander. I'm an East Coast guy, born, bred all the way through it. Bricks and mill buildings run through my blood. I went out to the LA area to an Action Sports Network event, which was held at Oakley headquarters. And it was the CMOs of like Oakley, Toyota USA, Hurley, Patagonia, North Face, all the companies you can imagine that are outdoorsy companies. And just before I go on the stage, literally like a minute and a half, the CMO of Oakley goes, dude, he goes, if the surf was really good today, there might not be anybody in that audience. And I said, what? And I'm such an East Coast guy. He goes, man, out here we just we work to live, man. And I am flustered because I'm thinking a very existential thought as I'm getting ready to go on the stage. Are they right? Or am I right? Ladies and gentlemen, welcome, Chris. And thank goodness there was, really bad surf because the audience was full. But I thought at that moment, I think I'm doing this wrong. What did I just do, John? I told you a story.
Yeah.
I told you a story that talks about my work ethic, the fact that I have to question my work ethic, and the culture of that setup. That's how I'm hoping StoryLeader helps businesses. I'm hoping I can start to talk through those kinds of stories with companies so that they start realizing, oh man, we've got to train in a different way.
It's such a hard thing to figure out what a person's story is. And so many people struggle to tell their own story. I remember for me, I had someone tell me about 6 or 7 years ago, as I was starting to do more things online, he said, John, I can't relate to you at all. You seem like this guy was born with a silver spoon in your mouth. You worked at the White House, because that's what I'm most known for. And you seem like you had every opportunity. And that was the exact opposite impression that I wanted people to have of me, because my father got laid off multiple times as I was growing up, because we had to move thousands of miles away, because I knew what it was like to struggle, because I've had struggles in my career and I wanted people to know that. So I started telling my story in a different way. And I started telling that story starting sooner in my journey and saying about how when I was a kid, my father got laid off and we had to move, so that people would relate to me, so that when I told about successes, they could relate as well. And I realized that you have to tell that story. But tell me, for you, when you work with a CEO, when you're talking to a CEO and you're trying to get into that organizational DNA, you're trying to uncover what the company's story is, how do you uncover it? Is it just rapid fire, getting to know them? Is it instinctive where you just eventually find what the story is? How do you get under the skin and figure out what that story is when they may not know what it is?
It's a great question, because what I want the answer to be isn't what the answer is. Some massive amount of this so far is just pure craft on my part and sort of like psychological skills on my part. And what I want the answer to be is some simple formula that we can all just take out of a workbook and look at these 3 pages in the back of my new book and, you're good. But it's not true, because what you alluded to is that the real story that really defines us almost always has that really open-faced vulnerability fairly early on in the story. And here's a name drop. I met Bob Iger of Disney, and it was on the Disney Dream boat media launch or whatever. So the boat is full of only media and their families. So ABC News, all the big name newses, and a bunch of idiot bloggers, of which I am one. And my friend Leanne, for no great reason, convinces everybody in their brothers, get Chris Brogan to be the last interview of the day. And nobody knows who I am. at all. Like it's not a thing. And so I get to be the last interview to Bob Iger. So he is pushed. Think about it, all day.
Oh,
People
he's
watch
doing the interviews, so he's interviewing you.
Bob.
Okay.
Well, no, he's the pretty face, and they roll in yet another crew to ask him all the questions about. Tell me, how big is the boat? Tell me.
Oh, you're interviewing Bob. Got it. Okay.
Bob Iger.
Okay. Head of Disney here. Okay.
Head of Disney. So here's the part that matters. I had to pump up the story though, because you have to know this man is bushed. This man he's probably done a few hundred interviews all over the world from this doofus boat.
Right.
He hasn't stopped really. I'm sure he got a sandwich somewhere, but he's pushed. Yeah. So I come, he's wearing like a black turtleneck. I'm wearing like, idiot blogger costume of the day, which was like a jacket with a button down and over jeans. And he shakes my hand. He's very nice. And immediately the first thing he says, where are you from originally? I said, oh, Maine. Huh, Maine, he says. You ever do any sailing? I'm the absolute working class guy that ever was. No, I didn't ever do any sailing. I was a Boy Scout, so we did canoeing. However, I said I sailed once in my life, if you can believe it. And yes, it was in Maine. It was in Searsport, Maine. He goes, huh, I've sailed in Searsport, Maine. I said, well, it was weird because I sailed on a really old sailing vessel that's kind of there like as a tourist thing, but you can crew on it. He says the Sylvina Beale. I crewed on that boat.
Wow.
Now I'm suddenly, the chair of Disney and I have this thing in common, and we have both sailed the same 1800s era vessel.
I love that. Crazy,
right? Yeah. And there's nothing bad that's going to happen after that. He has his arm around me for the whole interview like we're pals. That was no vulnerability. It took no vulnerability. All it took was that Bob wanted to make a connection to me. And so that's one element of leading through story.
Connection.
Leading through story, we make the mistake all the time. We worry we're not good enough. We worry we're not smart enough. We're not whatever enough. We're something, right? We're too ugly. We're too fat. We're too old. We're too something for the person we're in front of. What is really true about a story is the story really hums most when we connect somewhere in it to the person we're around. So you need to know your story, but what you most need to know is how can you make that story click hard enough with the people you're with. And that's how comedy works. You like comedians. When we watch comedians, the thing we love is that sort of 90-degree, we didn't think they were going there, but we love that other part where we go, oh my gosh, I totally do that. I thought I was the only one. And now a whole room full of people are laughing. And that's the thing. And so what I'm trying to teach when I go in, this is the longest answer to the shortest question. What I'm trying to teach is, how do I help you find those elements? How do I help you tune for them? And also, way most importantly, how do I strip away your armor enough that you can say something like that? I didn't have a lot of money. I always tell people, my parents, growing up, I was very lower class, very lower class, didn't know. And, my parents would be like, oh, this is amazing. We get to have Spam and rice twice in a row. How? No, you can't believe it. That's not normally how food goes. Normally you get something different every night, but you get to have it twice. And I'd be like, wow, this is amazing. I was an idiot. But, we ate really, I never had an empty belly, because my parents figured it out, made it work. My dad worked 4 jobs and my mom worked 2 or 3. Wow. And when you tell a story like that, someone goes, oh, you're not like that. When people find out I don't have a degree, but that I have 27 credits from 7 different universities, they go, oh, well, how'd you do what you're doing? And I say, well, the permission fairy came and they hit me on the shoulder and I've got the skills now. And right. That's how we get there, right? We get there from breaking down the thing we thought was true about the other person. And then we're like, oh man, we're totally on that ground. The only people you don't ever want that from are like your surgeon and your airplane captain. You want your airplane captain to be, I know everything.
Exactly. Now, a couple of these points that you hit on here, I think we could spend a lot of time on. One of the ones you mentioned was stripping away the armor, which is ironic in a sense because so many companies, so many leaders' armor has been stripped away, publicly with this downturn, with this global pandemic. So, talk about how companies are having to pivot and tell their stories in new ways now in light of the changing circumstances. I was just listening to a podcast interview with the founder of Eventbrite, and they, went from very successful company to laying off half their staff. And, they're still in the midst of redefining what their story looks like because they were based on, they were a software that was selling tickets for live events, right? I mean, that doesn't exist for the time being. So how are you watching CEOs, companies pivot and tell their story in a different way now?
I heard something the other day that's haunting me, and I didn't write it down like you do when you hear something that you like. And I'm killing myself that I didn't, because it was such a great sentence. And what I was saying is that the ideal brand doesn't serve a specific function. It serves a specific emotional kind of state, right? Nike doesn't sell shoes. Nike sells a drive to pursue and go after. And Nike sells sportsmanship and all that sort of a thing. And they also sell shoes and this and that and whatever. So when Nike makes a video and they say, stay home, that is a powerful message. And they said also, we're all on the same team. A year before the civil unrest that happens during COVID, a year before, they said, we're backing Colin Kaepernick, and we know that's going to make some of you mad. It's our move. Our move is we stand with this guy who is a sportsman and who believes in the things we believe in. And you know what? People did leave. And so people went to Adidas, and Adidas said, well, you know what we believe is we're going to pull a bunch of plastic out of the water, and we're going to make 1 million shoes out of like recycled out of the ocean plastic. So maybe someone who didn't believe for whatever reason in the other issue said, well, cool, I'm totally for the earth. Like, people can die, but the earth I want to keep. And they sold 2 million plastic shoes. They thought they were going to sell 1 million. They sold 2 million. And so clearly there was a voice there. When we have to return and kind of and pivot and shake ourselves to a new space, sometimes it's just not going to be on the thing we are known for selling. Eventbrite might be in a spot right now, but what else can they do? How else are people gathering? They're gathering online. We're going to make it so easy to make your online gathering good. We're going to do something that almost no platform does. So Joseph Jaffe does this video show called Corona TV, and he does the first part of it in an app called StreamYard that we talked about, and he does an after show in an app called Zoom. Do you know how hard it is to get somebody from StreamYard to Zoom? You know, it's like, well, there goes my audience. They're walking out,
Yeah.
right? If Eventbrite made the hallway between those two so easy, that would change someone's life. That's all they have to do. By the way, that idea is for free, Eventbrite. You've got to know that what do companies exist to do? They serve the needs of the people that they serve, right? So they have to serve their constituents. If they're public, they have to serve the Wall Street. But who do they really serve? The person who puts their money down somewhere. And all I keep seeing are two types of companies. Ones that like crash into the wall and hope someone pays for it. Or ones that are like, well, we got to do something. So here's the thing we decided we're going to do. And they're helping in some way. There's so many breweries making hand sanitizer right now.
Right. Yeah.
Interestingly, liquor sales are right up. But, they're also, doing their part. There's a lot of companies that retooled their assembly lines to make more masks and more visors and more whatever during this pandemic. And these moves are not going to be lost on people. I've seen like the pushback. I've seen people saying, oh, it's gimmicky. Well, it's not for the people that they helped. It's not for the people that felt like, oh my gosh, these guys had me.
And from a story perspective, I think it's incredibly moving. I watched a video, I think it was a New England company that does these like shutters, like you see on an old colonial style, home. And they've been doing it for like 250 years. And then in the pandemic, no one's buying shutters. So they immediately pivot and start making masks, but only for like 2 or 3 months. And then this video was about how they were coming out of that. And then, so the story really was that here's who we are. Here's what we've been doing for 200 plus years. And we're going to do it again. But when the shit hit the fan, we stopped, we contributed our part. And now we're going to go back to what we've been doing and continue to do it. And we're going to make people happy. And I love seeing the stories of these companies that are pivoting and that are finding their new story.
One way to rise, I think that's an important word, right? One way to rise is to say we're doing our part and that we're here and we're going to bring other people with us. The best stories in the world are the ones that are participatory. So my company is called StoryLeader. Donald Miller has Story Brand. One of the coolest things that Donald Miller put together in his little process in Story Brand is he teaches people all the time, you're not supposed to be Luke or Leia. You're supposed to be Yoda. You're supposed to be like the wise person guiding people towards. Before that, Charlie Green and David Maister wrote Trusted Advisor. You're supposed to be the trusted advisor, right? So in story work, we forget that we don't have to be the hero. We forget that what we could be is a really kick-ass non-player character on the way to some really cool experience. And that sometimes just adding in some way what we can bring to a picnic, right? What kind of things we can pull out of our backpack and bring to this next event are the thing, I think, that we can contribute and that will bring us to that next spot, even when we're stumbling on the way to that next spot, because they saw us there and they saw us pitching in.
Yeah, that's great. I think this is really interesting work and relevant in these times. And with so many companies having to diversify and put their staff either working from home or changing everyone outsourced, I think that it's going to be important for companies to be able to tell their story and redefine their culture at the same time. Chris, this has been great. I want to wrap things up with the question I always ask, which is, let's pretend we're at an awards banquet, much like the Oscars or the Emmys, and you're receiving an award for lifetime achievement for everything you've done up until this point. What we all want to know is, in addition to family and friends, who do you think? Who are the mentors? Who are the friends? Who are the business partners? Who are the peers? Who are the bosses? Who are the people you would acknowledge in your remarks?
I have to start with my mom and dad. My mom and dad were great at teaching me that it was okay to be a weirdo and an entrepreneur. They saw from a very early age that I was the kind of guy who was going to see the world differently, and they kept empowering me at every turn. My mom also instilled a really heavy work ethic because she scheduled people to work at the phone company. And so I got in a big car crash one day, and I was like, I don't think I can come to work tomorrow. And she goes, are you scheduled? And I said, yes. She goes, you'll be there. And, it was the first time I realized that I mattered outside of just my own body. I had great bosses along the way. Debbie Millen, who always taught us that brevity in meetings was really important. Brevity in conversation and communication is important. She was like, chop, let's get to the important part. And always in a loving way. Elena Figler, who taught me that strength and tenacity and persistence were a great way to be a leader, as long as you really couched it in striving towards the mission and not trying to go after humans along the way, and making sure it was a team-driven experience. Dan Carney, who taught me nothing ever happens with the drama that you expect it to have. My boss, Dave Johnson, it was a sad day when you don't learn anything. And really, ultimately, finally, my kids for teaching me the kind of leader that I have to be going forward. Because as much as we love to poke at generations, Gen Z is a whole different kind of leader. They have way more social interest than we do. They have way more passion about marrying their values to the companies that they choose to serve. And they are not going to settle for just do the job. And I think that all leaders had best heed people starting around age 16 and up, because there's a whole new world coming. If you're going to try to build longevity to your corporation, those are the leaders of tomorrow that you need to really start engineering for today.
ChrisBrogan.com is the website, and on YouTube and Twitter and all those different channels, if you go look for Chris, you can find him there. Anywhere else in particular where you want to point people to go check and learn more about you?
That's all of them. If you swing by chrisbrogan.com, just grab my newsletter, because that's the one thing I do every week that I think is probably my best work. And you can always just hit reply, and I always love to talk to people there.
That's great. All right, Chris, thanks so much.
John, thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast with John Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution.
Revolution.
And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution podcast.